The dirt road leading into Cedar Springs seemed to mock Olivia Fairchild as much as the townspeople soon would, each weary step driving the ragged edges of her worn-out shoes deeper into her blistered feet. Spring of 1876 had brought nothing but hardship since she'd buried her father 3 months ago, leaving her with nothing but debts, a handful of possessions packed in a single trunk, and the clothes on her back, including the shamefully tattered shoes that had carried her the last mile into town after the stagecoach had left her at the crossroads. The late afternoon sun beat down on Olivia's shoulders as she paused to catch her breath, pushing a strand of copper hair back under her bonnet. At 22, she had expected more from life than becoming an object of pity, but circumstances had forced her hand. The letter in her reticule promised a position as a schoolteacher in this frontier town, her education being the one thing her father couldn't gamble away. Cedar Springs appeared before her like a mirage, a collection of wooden buildings stretched along a single main street, the heart of civilization in this part of Wyoming territory. Men in dusty clothes gathered outside the saloon, while women in practical dresses hurried about their business. Olivia straightened her spine and adjusted her simple blue dress, worn but clean. She couldn't hide her shoes, but she could hold her head high. As she approached the general store, where she'd been instructed to inquire about her accommodations, a group of women standing outside fell silent. Their eyes traveled downward, settling on her feet with undisguised disdain. "My word," one woman whispered loudly enough for Olivia to hear. "Is that our new schoolteacher? Look at those shoes. How can someone teach our children looking like that?" Another added with a sniff. "Practically a beggar." Olivia's cheeks burned, but she kept walking. The third woman, older and dressed in expensive fabric, stepped directly into her path. "Miss Fairchild, I presume?" Her tone was cool, her eyes critical. "Yes, madam. I've come about the teaching position." "I'm Mrs. Henderson, head of the school board." The woman's gaze lingered pointedly on Olivia's feet. "I see you've arrived, somewhat unprepared for your position." Olivia fought the urge to hide her feet beneath her skirts. "The journey was difficult, but I assure you I'm fully qualified. Qualifications are only part of what we require, Miss Fairchild." Mrs. Henderson's lips thinned. "Our schoolteacher must set an example. Appearance matters in a respectable town." The other women nodded in agreement, their whispers growing louder. Olivia felt her hopes crumbling as quickly as the soles of her shoes. "Perhaps you misunderstood our needs," Mrs. Henderson continued. "We need someone who can represent proper civilization to our children, not someone who looks as though they've walked here from Boston." "I did walk the last mile," Olivia admitted, immediately regretting her honesty when the women exchanged knowing glances. "Well," said Mrs. Henderson with finality, "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. The position requires someone of greater means." Olivia's throat tightened. "But your letter confirmed that was before we saw your condition." Mrs. Henderson gestured vaguely at Olivia's entire person. "Good day, Miss Fairchild." The women turned away, leaving Olivia standing alone in the street, trunk at her feet and nowhere to go. The stagecoach wouldn't return for another week, and her remaining money wouldn't cover a room for that long. "Quite the welcome committee we've got here," a deep voice drawled from behind her. Olivia turned to find a tall man leaning against a hitching post, watching the exchange with narrowed eyes. His broad shoulders filled out a work-worn shirt, and his face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Unlike the townswomen, his expression held no judgment, only a quiet anger that wasn't directed at her. "Don't mind them," he said, straightening to his full height. "They treat anyone new the same way until they decide if you're worth their time." "And clearly I'm not," Olivia replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. The man's eyes, startlingly blue against his sun-darkened skin, traveled down to her shoes and then back to her face. But where the women had looked with scorn, his gaze held something else. "Understanding, perhaps. Thomas Sullivan," he said, offering his hand. "Most folks call me Trace." "Olivia Fairchild," she replied, hesitantly accepting his handshake. His palm was calloused but warm against her skin. "I heard you're supposed to be the new teacher." He gestured toward the women who were still gossiping nearby. "Don't let them chase you off before you've even had a chance to prove yourself." "They've made it clear the position is no longer available," Olivia said, glancing down at her worn shoes with their visible holes. Trace's jaw tightened as he followed her gaze. This town needs a teacher more than it needs their approval. He looked back toward the women, who were now staring at their interaction with undisguised interest. With deliberate volume, he declared, "She'll walk into my home just as she is, shoes and all, and be more welcome than those who judge by appearances." Olivia's eyes widened at his bold statement. "Sir, my sister runs a boarding house just down the street," he clarified with a hint of a smile. "She's got a room that's yours if you want it, at least until you sort things out. And she won't care about your shoes." "I couldn't possibly accept." "Sure you can," he interrupted, bending to pick up her trunk with ease. "Besides, Sarah's been complaining about wanting someone educated to talk to. You'd be doing her a favor." Olivia hesitated, torn between pride and desperation. "I don't have much money." "Didn't ask for any," Trace replied, already walking down the street with her trunk. Coming. With one last look at the disapproving faces of the town's matrons, Olivia made her decision. She hurried after Trace, wincing slightly as her battered shoes rubbed against her already raw feet. "Why would you help a stranger?" she asked when she caught up to him. Trace's expression softened. "Because my ma came to this territory with nothing but the clothes on her back and a determination to make a life for herself. Someone gave her a chance. Seems only right to pass that on." They walked in silence for a moment before he added, "Besides, anyone who can make Mrs. Henderson that flustered is someone I want to know better." For the first time since arriving in Cedar Springs, Olivia felt a smile tug at her lips. "I didn't intend to cause a stir. Sometimes the most worthwhile things do," Trace replied, his eyes meeting hers with a warmth that chased away the chill of rejection. As they approached a two-story wooden building with a sign that read, "Sullivan Boarding House," Olivia felt a flutter of something she hadn't expected to find in this dusty frontier town hope. Trace's sister Sarah proved to be his opposite in many ways, petite where he was tall, talkative where he was reserved, but they shared the same direct blue gaze and genuine warmth. She welcomed Olivia without a single glance at her shoes, showing her to a small but clean room on the second floor. "Bathrooms down the hall. Meals are at 7, noon, and 6, Sarah explained, bouncing slightly on her toes. "We've got 4 other boarders, all men working at the sawmill, but they're decent sorts. Any trouble, and Trace will set them straight." "I'm not sure how long I can stay," Olivia admitted. "Without the teaching position." "Nonsense," Sarah interrupted. "This town needs a proper teacher, not whatever Mrs. Henderson thinks is proper. Give it a few days. Things have a way of working themselves out here." Before Olivia could protest further, Sarah was gone in a whirlwind of skirts, leaving her alone in the small room. Exhausted, she sank onto the narrow bed and finally allowed herself to remove her torturous shoes. Her stockings were worn through in places, her feet red and blistered beneath. A soft knock at the door startled her. She hastily tucked her feet under her skirt. "Yes." The door opened slightly, and Trace appeared with a basin of steaming water. His eyes took in her posture, and understanding crossed his face. Without comment, he set the basin down beside her. "Sarah thought you might want to wash up before supper," he said. "I'll have her bring you some salve for those feet." Embarrassed, but grateful, Olivia nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan." "Trace," he corrected gently. "Get some rest, Miss Fairchild. Tomorrow's a new day in Cedar Springs." As the door closed behind him, Olivia stared at the steaming basin. She hadn't expected kindness in this town, especially not from a stranger who looked at her ruined shoes and saw a person worth helping instead of someone to ridicule. For the first time since her father's death, Olivia felt tears spring to her eyes, not from despair, but from the unexpected gift of compassion. She lowered her aching feet into the warm water and allowed herself, just for a moment, to believe that perhaps things might work out after all. By morning, word of the new arrival and her confrontation with Mrs. Henderson had spread throughout Cedar Springs. Olivia discovered this when she ventured downstairs for breakfast and found the boarding house dining room full of curious eyes. "Gentlemen," Sarah announced, leading Olivia to an empty chair. "This is Miss Fairchild. She's staying with us for a while, so mind your manners." For men of varying ages nodded politely, though their curious glances lingered. Olivia smoothed her skirts self-consciously, grateful that Sarah had loaned her a pair of simple slippers that, while too large, concealed her battered feet. Miss Fairchild was supposed to be our new teacher, Sarah continued, serving thick slices of bread and bacon, until certain individuals took issue with her appearance after her long journey. That'd be the Henderson woman and her cronies, said the oldest of the men, a grizzled fellow with kind eyes. Don't you worry, miss. They run everyone through their paces when they first arrive. Thank you, mister? Olivia inquired. Miller. Walter Miller. Been cutting timber in these parts for 30 years. He gestured to the others in turn. That's Frank and George Thompson brothers. Not that you'd know it to look at them, and young Daniel Cooper. The men murmured greetings, and Olivia felt herself relaxing slightly. These rough-hewn men, with their calloused hands and simple manners, seemed far more welcoming than the supposedly refined ladies of the town. Where's Trace this morning? She asked Sarah, noticing his absence. Already out at the ranch, Sarah replied. He stays in town with me a few nights a week, but he's got a place about 5 miles out, raising horses, among other things. Olivia nodded, filing this information away. Somehow, knowing that the man who had come to her aid was a rancher rather than just a town resident made his intervention even more meaningful. He'd had no real reason to involve himself in town matters. After breakfast, Olivia offered to help Sarah with the dishes, grateful for the chance to repay some small part of the kindness she'd been shown. You know, Sarah said as they worked, the school board isn't just Mrs. Henderson, though she likes to act like it. There's Mayor Wilkins and Reverend Parker, too. They actually make the final decisions. Olivia shook her head. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I wouldn't want to cause trouble. Trouble? Sarah laughed. This town runs on trouble. Besides, the children need education, and from your letters of recommendation that Trace happened to see on Mrs. Henderson's desk when he delivered some papers yesterday, you're more than qualified. He saw my letters? Olivia asked, surprised. My brother has a way of noticing things, Sarah replied with a smile. He said your credentials from that Boston school were impressive. Olivia felt a flush of pride mixed with embarrassment. I worked hard for my education. Then you should use it, Sarah said firmly. Mayor Wilkins will be at the general store this afternoon. Perhaps you should introduce yourself properly this time, without Henderson's interference. Despite her misgivings, Olivia found herself agreeing. After helping Sarah with the morning chores, she changed into her best dress, a simple navy blue with minimal signs of wear, and borrowed Sarah's shawl. The slippers were still too large, but with an extra pair of stockings, they stayed on well enough. The walk to the general store gave Olivia time to gather her courage. Cedar Springs looked different in the clear morning light, less intimidating, more like a town finding its place in the vast landscape. Children played in the dusty street while men and women went about their business, building a community in this remote corner of Wyoming. The general store smelled of coffee, leather, and dried goods. A bell jingled as Olivia entered, drawing the attention of the shopkeeper and the distinguished-looking gentleman examining a display of pipes. Miss Fairchild, isn't it? The gentleman asked, turning to face her. I'm Edward Wilkins, mayor of our humble establishment. I understand there was some unpleasantness yesterday. Olivia lifted her chin. A misunderstanding, I hope. I came to Cedar Springs because your town advertised for a qualified teacher. I have references from the Boston Ladies Academy where I taught for 2 years, and a degree from Oberlin College. The mayor's eyebrows rose. Oberlin? That's quite impressive for a young woman. My father believed in education, Olivia said simply. Before his passing, he ensured I would have the means to support myself through teaching. Mayor Wilkins studied her for a moment. Mrs. Henderson expressed concerns about your presentation. I arrived after a difficult journey, Olivia acknowledged. My appearance yesterday wasn't representative of my professional standards. However, I believe a teacher should be judged by her ability to educate, not by temporary circumstances. A smile crept across the mayor's face. Well said, Miss Fairchild. The school board meets tomorrow at noon. I suggest you attend and make your case directly. Bring those references. Hope bloomed in Olivia's chest. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Don't thank me yet, he warned. Mrs. Henderson has influence. But this town needs a teacher more than it needs to satisfy her particular notions of propriety. He tipped his hat. Good day, Miss Fairchild. I look forward to our meeting tomorrow. As Olivia left the store, her step lighter than it had been in days, she nearly collided with Trace Sullivan. He steadied her with a hand on her elbow, his touch brief but firm. "Sorry," she said, flustered by his sudden appearance. "I wasn't watching where I was going. Heading somewhere with purpose," he observed, a hint of a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "That's a good sign. I just spoke with Mayor Wilkins about the teaching position," Olivia explained. "He suggested I attend the school board meeting tomorrow." Trace's smile widened. "Good. This town needs someone who won't back down at the first sign of opposition." "I haven't secured the position yet," she reminded him. "But you will," he said with certainty that bolstered her own confidence. "I've got some business in town today. Would you like to see more of Cedar Springs? Might help to know the place you'll be teaching." The invitation surprised her, but Olivia found herself nodding. "I'd like that very much." Their tour of Cedar Springs revealed a town larger than her initial impression suggested. Beyond the main street lay neighborhoods of simple homes, a small church, and at the edge of town, a whitewashed building that Trace identified as the schoolhouse. "It's not much," he said as they stood before it, "but it's sturdy. Built it myself, along with some other men, 3 years back." Olivia turned to him in surprise. "You built the schoolhouse?" He shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. "My ma taught us to read and write, but she always wished we'd had proper schooling. When the town decided to build a school, I wanted to make sure it was done right." The simple building took on new significance as Olivia imagined Trace working on it, driven by respect for education despite his own lack of formal schooling. She approached the door, finding it unlocked. Inside, the schoolhouse was a single room with rows of rough-hewn benches and desks. A larger desk stood at the front, and a blackboard hung on the wall behind it. Bookshelves, mostly empty, lined one wall. Sunlight streamed through windows on both sides, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. "How many children attend?" Olivia asked, running her fingers over the teacher's desk. "About 20, when they're all here," Trace replied, watching her from the doorway. "Ages 6 to 16. Some of the older ones only come in winter, when there's less work." Olivia nodded, familiar with the practical realities of frontier education. "And the previous teacher?" "Mr. Harding. Decent enough, but he left for California 2 months ago. The children have been without lessons since." Turning slowly, taking in the room that could become her domain, Olivia felt a sense of purpose settling over her. "They deserve better than that." "Yes," Trace agreed quietly, "they do." Their eyes met across the sunlit classroom, and something passed between them, a shared understanding of what mattered beyond appearances and social standing. For a moment, Olivia forgot about her borrowed slippers and precarious situation, seeing only possibility in the dusty schoolroom and the man watching her with quiet approval. The school board meeting the following day proved to be exactly the battleground Olivia had anticipated. Mrs. Henderson arrived with 2 like-minded women in tow, while Mayor Wilkins and Reverend Parker represented the more practical faction. Olivia, dressed in her best with her credentials in hand, waited outside the mayor's office while they deliberated her case. "You look like you're facing a firing squad instead of a teaching position," came Trace's voice from behind her. Olivia turned, surprised to see him leaning against the wall in the corridor. "What are you doing here?" "Moral support," he replied with a casual shrug that didn't quite mask his concern. "Besides, I've got a stake in this too." "You do?" "2 of my ranch hands have children who need schooling," he explained. "And I helped build that schoolhouse. Be ashamed to see it standing empty because of foolish pride." Before Olivia could respond, the door opened, and Mayor Wilkins beckoned her inside. With one last glance at Trace, who gave her an encouraging nod, she entered the room. The deliberation was heated, but mercifully brief. Mrs. Henderson objected strenuously to Olivia's appointment, citing her arrival appearance and lack of connections in town. Mayor Wilkins countered with her impressive qualifications, while Reverend Parker ultimately broke the tie by emphasizing the children's need for immediate education. "Miss Fairchild," Mayor Wilkins announced finally, "the board has decided to offer you a probationary position as Cedar Springs schoolteacher. You'll have 3 months to prove your capabilities, after which we'll reevaluate your status." Relief flooded through Olivia. "Thank you. I won't disappoint you." "See that you don't," Mrs. Henderson sniffed, gathering her things. "And do something about your appearance. A teacher must command respect." As the board members filed out, Olivia stood in the empty room, clutching her acceptance letter. She had secured a position, housing at the boarding house, and a chance to build a new life. It wasn't the future she had imagined growing up in Boston, but it held its own promise. "Congratulations, teacher," Trace said from the doorway, his smile reaching his eyes. "Never doubted you for a minute." His steady confidence in her, despite knowing her for barely 2 days, touched something deep within Olivia. "Thank you for your support, Mr. Sullivan." "Trace," he corrected, as he had each time before. And it wasn't just support. It was truth. "This town needs someone like you, someone who sees what matters beneath the surface." There was something in his gaze that made Olivia wonder if he was still talking about teaching. Before she could decipher it, he gestured toward the door. "Sarah's planned a small celebration dinner. Nothing fancy, but she was pretty confident you'd get the position." Olivia laughed, the tension of the day finally breaking. "It seems confidence runs in your family." Among other traits, he agreed with a wink that sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "Shall we?" That evening marked the true beginning of Olivia's life in Cedar Springs. Sarah's celebration dinner turned into an impromptu gathering of well-wishers, including Mayor Wilkins and several parents eager to meet their children's new teacher. By the time the last guest departed, Olivia felt more at home than she had anywhere since her father's death. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity. The school term began with 23 students of varying ages and abilities. Olivia quickly discovered that frontier education required flexibility and creativity beyond anything she'd needed in Boston. Some children read at advanced levels while others had never held a book. Many arrived tired from morning chores or missed days when family needs took precedence. Yet she found unexpected joy in the challenge. Without Mrs. Henderson's rigid curriculum to follow, Olivia adapted her teaching to her students' lives. Mathematics lessons incorporated ranch calculations and store inventory. Reading sessions featured stories of exploration and frontier life alongside classics. Science became an outdoor adventure examining local plants and animals. Word of her innovative methods spread quickly. Children who had previously viewed school as a punishment began arriving early, eager for the day's lessons. Parents reported their children discussing education at the dinner table, a novelty that pleased even the most practical-minded farmer. Throughout those early weeks, Trace Sullivan remained a steady presence in Olivia's new life. Though his ranch duties kept him busy, he found reasons to visit town regularly, often stopping by the schoolhouse to repair a loose board or deliver books he'd acquired on his supply runs. "You don't have to do this," Olivia told him one afternoon as he installed a new shelf for her growing collection of learning materials. "I know," he replied simply, continuing his work. "Then why do you?" He paused, hammer in midair, and looked at her directly. "Because it matters to you. And you matter to me." The straightforward admission hung between them, neither fully acknowledged nor dismissed. Olivia felt her cheeks warm under his steady gaze, but didn't look away. "The children appreciate it," she said finally. "As do I." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Good. That's good." Their conversations often took this pattern, hovering at the edge of something deeper before retreating to safer ground. Olivia found herself looking forward to his visits, planning lessons that might extend into the afternoon when he typically appeared. For his part, Trace seemed to find increasingly creative reasons to be in town, despite Sarah's knowing smiles and the occasional raised eyebrow from townspeople. As summer progressed, Cedar Springs began to feel like home. Olivia's initially cool reception from Mrs. Henderson's circle gradually thawed as her teaching successes became impossible to ignore. Even Mrs. Henderson herself, upon discovering that Olivia had taught her grandson to read after a year of failed attempts, begrudgingly acknowledged her certain capabilities with difficult children. One Friday afternoon in late July, Olivia dismissed her students early, having promised them a special outing the following Monday to study the local river ecosystem. As the last child disappeared down the dusty road, she turned to find Trace leaning against the schoolhouse doorframe, hat in hand. "Hard at work, I see," he commented, blue eyes crinkling at the corners. "Planning an expedition," she corrected, gathering her teaching materials. "Though I fear my knowledge of Wyoming flora might not be sufficient for proper identification." "I might know someone who could help with that," Trace offered casually. "Fellow who's lived here his whole life, knows every plant and animal in the territory." Olivia raised an eyebrow. And would this knowledgeable fellow be available to guide a group of enthusiastic children on Monday morning? For Cedar Springs' favorite teacher? His smile widened. I reckon he could arrange it. Excellent, Olivia said, trying to ignore the pleasure his compliment stirred. Though I'm not sure I've earned favorite status just yet. You have with some of us, Trace replied, his tone lighter than his eyes suggested. After a moment, he added, Actually, I came by for another reason. I was wondering if you might join me for a ride tomorrow. Olivia paused in her organizing. A ride? To my ranch, he clarified. Sarah mentioned you haven't seen much beyond town yet. Thought you might like to see a bit more of Wyoming before the weather turns. The invitation was unexpected but not unwelcome. After weeks of building whatever this was between them, the chance to spend time together away from the watchful eyes of Cedar Springs held undeniable appeal. I'd like that, she said before practicality intruded. Though I should warn you, I haven't ridden much. Trace's expression softened. I've got a gentle mare who'll take good care of you, and I'll be right beside you the whole way. The promise in those words extended beyond the ride itself, and they both knew it. Olivia found herself nodding, anticipation already building. What time shall I be ready? 8, he suggested. We can make a day of it, if you're willing. 8 it is, she agreed, gathering her courage to add, I'm looking forward to it. Trace's smile as he left the schoolhouse stayed with Olivia long into the evening, warming her thoughts as she prepared for her first real adventure in Wyoming territory and her first time alone with the man who'd welcomed her just as she was, holes in her shoes and all. The morning dawned clear and bright, the summer heat not yet oppressive as Olivia waited outside the boarding house. She'd borrowed another dress from Sarah, this one more practical for riding, though she still lacked proper boots. Her own shoes, while still worn, had been carefully mended by the town cobbler, who had taken pity on the new teacher and charged her only half his usual fee. Trace arrived precisely at 8, leading 2 horses, his own sturdy black gelding and a smaller chestnut mare with a white blaze. He dismounted with easy grace, approaching Olivia with a warmth that had become familiar yet still sent her heart racing. Morning, he greeted, taking in her appearance with approval. Ready for your Wyoming adventure? As ready as I'll ever be, she replied, eyeing the mare with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. This is Daisy, Trace introduced, bringing the chestnut forward. Gentlest horse I've ever bred. She'll take good care of you. Olivia reached out hesitantly to stroke the mare's soft nose. She's beautiful. She is, Trace agreed, though his eyes remained on Olivia. Need a hand up? At her nod, he positioned himself beside her, hands at her waist. Left foot in the stirrup, then push up while I lift, he instructed, his voice close to her ear. The sensation of his strong hands supporting her as she mounted sent a flush of awareness through Olivia that had nothing to do with exertion. Once seated in the saddle, she found herself higher than expected, gripping the pommel with white knuckles. Trace adjusted her stirrups before mounting his own horse with practiced ease. Comfortable. I'm not sure that's the word I'd choose, she admitted with a nervous laugh. His eyes crinkled with amusement. You'll get used to it. Just relax and let Daisy do the work. She'll follow midnight without any guidance from you. True to his word, once they left the town limits, Olivia found herself settling into the rhythm of the horse's movements. Trace kept their pace leisurely, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the territory's early days. His family had been among the first settlers in the area, arriving when he was just 12 years old. Must have been difficult, Olivia observed, starting over in such a wild place. Trace nodded, his expression thoughtful. It was. Lost my pa the first winter. Hunting accident. He glanced at her. Left ma with 4 children and a land claim she couldn't work alone. Yet she managed, Olivia prompted, sensing there was more to the story. She did. Pride colored his voice. Toughest person I've ever known. Taught us to read by lamplight after working from sunrise to sunset. Kept us fed when others were starving. Never complained, not once. She sounds remarkable. She was, he said softly. Lost her 5 years ago. Pneumonia. Olivia's heart ached for him. I'm sorry. Don't be, he replied, meeting her eyes. She lived the life she chose, on her own terms. Can't ask for more than that. The simple wisdom in his words resonated with Olivia's own situation. Wasn't she too? trying to build a life on her own terms, despite the obstacles. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the landscape opening up around them. Rolling hills covered in summer grasses stretched toward distant mountains, their peaks still showing traces of snow. Wildflowers dotted the meadows in patches of yellow, purple, and white, swaying in the gentle breeze. "It's beautiful," Olivia breathed, taking in the vastness of it all. Boston, with its crowded streets and brick buildings, seemed like another world entirely. "It grows on you," Trace agreed. "First time I saw it, I thought it was the emptiest place on earth. Now I can't imagine being hemmed in by buildings and people." As they crested a rise, Trace's ranch came into view in the valley below. A sturdy log house stood at its center, surrounded by outbuildings, corrals, and fenced pastures where horses grazed in small groups. A creek wound through the property, its banks lined with cottonwood trees that provided patches of welcome shade. "Sullivan Ranch," Trace announced with understated pride. "Not the biggest spread in Wyoming, but it's mine." "It's wonderful," Olivia said sincerely, understanding now why he split his time between town and this peaceful valley. "How many horses do you raise?" "About 30 at present, plus the working stock," he replied as they began their descent toward the ranch. "Train them for ranch work mostly, though I've started breeding some finer stock for carriages and riding." As they approached, two men emerged from one of the outbuildings, waving in greeting. Trace explained they were his ranch hands, Luis and Charlie, who lived in a small cabin on the property. Both tipped their hats respectfully to Olivia as Trace helped her dismount. "Miss Fairchild is Cedar Springs schoolteacher," Trace told them. "Thought she should see what lies beyond the town limits." "Pleased to meet you, madam," Charlie said, a weathered man with kind eyes. "My boy Sammy talks about your lessons all the time. Says you're making learning fun, which I never thought possible." Olivia smiled, pleased by the unexpected compliment. "Sammy is a bright student." "You should be proud." "I am, madam. Thanks to you." After the men returned to their work, Trace led Olivia on a tour of the ranch. The main house surprised her with its comfortable interior, far more refined than its rustic exterior suggested. Handcrafted furniture, colorful woven rugs, and bookshelves filled with well-read volumes created a home that reflected its owner's character, straightforward but thoughtful, practical yet appreciative of beauty. "My mother's influence," Trace explained when he caught her admiring a particularly fine quilt. "She believed just because we lived on the frontier didn't mean we had to live without civilization's comforts." "A wise woman," Olivia agreed, running her fingers along a bookshelf. "I'm impressed by your collection." Trace looked almost embarrassed. "Reading passes the winter evenings. Not much else to do when snow's piled to the windowsills." They shared a simple lunch on the porch, watching the horses in the nearby pasture while discussing books, teaching, and the future of Cedar Springs. Trace spoke of his hopes for the territory with a quiet passion that revealed his deep connection to the land and its people. "Wyoming's different," he told her as they sat side by side on the porch steps. "Women can vote here, own property in their own names. It's not perfect, but it's a place where people can build something real, something lasting." "Is that what you're building?" Olivia asked, genuinely curious about his vision. He considered this, eyes on the distant mountains. "I'm trying. Started with just the land and a few horses. Each year it grows a little more." He glanced at her. "What about you? Is teaching in Cedar Springs just a stopping point, or something more?" The question held weight beyond its simple phrasing. Olivia chose her words carefully. "When I came here, I was desperate for any position that would allow me to support myself. But now," she gestured to the landscape before them, "there's something compelling about this place. About building something where there was nothing before." Trace nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's the frontier spirit talking. Gets in your blood." "Perhaps," she agreed with a smile. "Or perhaps it's the company." The words slipped out before she could censor them, but Olivia didn't regret their honesty. Something was growing between them, something worth acknowledging. Trace's expression softened as he held her gaze. "The company's better than it's been in a long while," he said quietly. After a moment, he added, "Would you like to see the new foals? Had 3 born this spring." The rest of the afternoon passed too quickly. Trace showed her the pride of his breeding program, spirited young horses with clean lines and intelligent eyes. He introduced her to each of his working animals, explaining their training and temperaments with the patience of a natural teacher. By the time they prepared to return to town, Olivia felt she'd glimpsed a vital part of who Trace Sullivan truly was, not just the helpful stranger who'd come to her aid, but a man of vision, integrity, and gentle strength. As they rode back toward Cedar Springs, the setting sun painting the grasslands in shades of gold and amber, Olivia found herself wishing the day wouldn't end. Their conversation flowed easily, punctuated by comfortable silences that felt as natural as breathing. "Thank you," she said as the town came into view. "For showing me your home. For everything, really." Trace guided his horse closer to hers, their legs nearly touching as they rode side by side. "My pleasure. Though I hope it won't be your only visit." "I'd like that," Olivia replied, meeting his eyes. The connection between them hummed with potential, a current neither was quite ready to name, but both clearly felt. As they reached the boarding house and Trace helped her dismount, his hands lingered at her waist just a moment longer than necessary. "Good night, Olivia," he said softly, her name on his lips sounding like something precious. "Good night, Trace," she responded, reluctant to break the spell of the day. As she watched him ride away, leading Daisy beside him, Olivia acknowledged to herself what her heart had been trying to tell her for weeks. She was falling in love with Trace Sullivan, a man as far from her Boston expectations as Wyoming was from Massachusetts, yet somehow exactly what she needed. The realization should have frightened her. Instead, it filled her with a quiet certainty that whatever happened next, Cedar Springs was no longer just a desperate refuge, it was becoming home. The following weeks brought a deepening of both Olivia's professional standing and her relationship with Trace. Her river expedition with the children was a resounding success, with Trace's knowledge of local wildlife and terrain transforming a simple nature walk into an adventure the students couldn't stop talking about. Parents who had initially been skeptical of her unconventional methods became supporters as their children's enthusiasm for learning grew visible. Even Mrs. Henderson reluctantly acknowledged Olivia's positive influence after her grandson proudly demonstrated his new reading skills at a Sunday social. "Perhaps your methods have some merit," she conceded with what, for her, passed as high praise. As summer faded into autumn, Olivia and Trace fell into a comfortable rhythm. He visited the school regularly, sometimes bringing interesting specimens for the children to examine or helping with repairs. On weekends, they often rode together, exploring the surrounding countryside while sharing their thoughts and dreams. Though nothing had been formally declared between them, the town observed their growing closeness with knowing smiles and occasional good-natured teasing. "When are you going to make it official?" Sarah asked her brother one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch, watching Olivia in the garden helping one of the younger students identify plants for a school project. "Make what official?" Trace replied, feigning ignorance though his eyes never left Olivia. Sarah snorted. "Don't play dumb with me, Thomas Sullivan. You've been sweet on that girl since the day she arrived. Half the town's taking bets on when you'll finally speak up." Trace shifted uncomfortably. "It's not that simple." "Seems simple enough to me," his sister countered. "You love her. Anyone with eyes can see it. And she feels the same way about you." "You don't know that," he said, though hope flickered in his expression. Yet he hesitated, concerned that her Boston upbringing had given her expectations a Wyoming rancher might not be able to fulfill. Olivia, for her part, found herself increasingly torn between the life she was building in Cedar Springs and the nagging question of whether Trace saw her as more than a friend. Their time together had become the highlight of her days, but as autumn deepened, she wondered if she had misread the warmth in his eyes, the lingering touches that never quite became more. The answer came unexpectedly on a crisp October afternoon. School had just dismissed for the day when Olivia heard the familiar sound of approaching hoofbeats. Looking up from her desk, she saw Trace dismounting outside, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "Afternoon," he greeted, removing his hat as he entered the schoolhouse. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," she assured him, setting aside her grading. "Is everything all right? You look troubled." Trace ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of nervousness. "Just got word from the stagecoach driver. There's a letter for you at the post office." From Boston. Olivia's heart skipped. She'd written to former colleagues at the Ladies' Academy months ago, but had received no reply until now. Thank you for letting me know. Trace nodded, hesitating before adding. Driver mentioned it was from the headmistress herself. Said it looked important. The implication hung in the air between them. An important letter from Boston could mean an opportunity, perhaps an invitation to return to her former position or something similar. The thought, which might once have filled Olivia with relief, now created a hollow sensation in her chest. I see, she said, gathering her things. I should probably collect it then. They walked to the post office in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The letter, when the postmaster handed it to her, was indeed addressed in the distinctive handwriting of Mrs. Eleanor Thornton, headmistress of the Boston Ladies' Academy. Would you like some privacy? Trace asked as they stepped back onto the boardwalk. Olivia shook her head. No need. It's probably just a response to my update about my new position. But as she broke the seal and unfolded the thick paper, her expression changed. Trace watched as surprise, then something like conflict crossed her features. What is it? He asked, unable to contain his concern. Olivia looked up, her eyes meeting his. They're offering me my position back, with increased salary and housing provided. She swallowed. Mrs. Thornton writes that they made a terrible mistake in letting me go after father's debts became known. They want me to return for the spring term. Trace felt as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. I see, he managed, struggling to keep his voice even. That's quite an opportunity. Yes, Olivia agreed, though her tone lacked enthusiasm. It would mean security, a return to civilization, as Mrs. Henderson would say. Is that what you want? Trace asked, the question holding all the weight of his unspoken feelings. Olivia folded the letter carefully, buying time as she sorted through her conflicted emotions. 6 months ago, it would have been everything I wanted, a chance to reclaim the life I thought I'd lost. And now, Trace prompted, hope and fear battling in his heart. Looking up at him, standing in the afternoon sunlight on Cedar Springs' dusty Main Street, Olivia suddenly saw with perfect clarity what truly mattered. Not the security of Boston or the prestige of the academy, but the life she'd built here, the children who looked to her with trust, the community that had become home, and most of all, the man before her whose quiet strength had supported her from the beginning. Now, she said softly, I find I have reasons to stay that far outweigh any reasons to leave. The tension in Trace's shoulders eased slightly. Such as, my students, she began, stepping closer to him. The school we're building together. This town that's become home more quickly than I ever imagined possible. Trace nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. Those are good reasons. They are, she agreed. But there's one more. Gathering her courage, she added, the most important one. And what might that be? He asked, his voice dropping to a near whisper as the space between them narrowed further. You, Olivia said simply. You, Trace Sullivan, who saw me at my worst and still believed I was worth helping. Who never once made me feel ashamed of my circumstances. Who showed me that a life I never planned could be more fulfilling than anything I'd imagined. The admission hung between them for a heartbeat before Trace closed the remaining distance, one hand coming up to cup her cheek with infinite tenderness. I've been trying to find the courage to tell you, he confessed, his voice rough with emotion, that I've been falling in love with you since the moment you held your head high despite those women mocking your shoes. That I've never met anyone with your kind of strength and grace. That I can't imagine Cedar Springs or my life without you in it. Olivia's heart soared at his words. Then it seems we're in agreement, she whispered, a smile blooming on her face. About what? He asked, his thumb gently tracing the curve of her cheek. That Boston will have to find another teacher, she replied. Because I'm exactly where I belong. The kiss that followed was gentle at first, a tentative question answered with growing certainty as Olivia's arms wound around Trace's neck and his hand slipped to her waist, drawing her closer. Neither noticed the curious glances from passers-by or Sarah's triumphant smile from the mercantile doorway. In that moment, there was only the two of them, finally acknowledging what both had felt for months. When they eventually parted, Trace rested his forehead against hers, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. I should probably do this properly, he said, though he made no move to release her. Court you the way you deserve. Olivia laughed softly. I think we're well past the beginning stages of courtship, don't you? Unless those rides and conversations weren't what I thought they were. They were exactly what you thought, he assured her, his smile widening. But I'd still like to do right by you. Dinner at the hotel restaurant tomorrow night? As an official beginning. I'd like that, she agreed, reluctantly stepping back as she became aware of their public location. Though I believe we've already had quite a beginning. Trace captured her hand in his, unwilling to break contact completely. The best kind, he said, raising her fingers to his lips in a gesture that sent warmth spreading through her. One that started with the truth of who we are, not what others see. As they walked back toward the boarding house, hands still linked, Olivia reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. The financial ruin that had seemed like the end of her world had instead led her to a new beginning. The worn-out shoes that had made her an object of ridicule had ultimately led her to the man now walking beside her, whose clear-eyed honesty had recognized her worth when others saw only her circumstances. Cedar Springs wasn't Boston, with its culture and refinement. Wyoming Territory wasn't Massachusetts, with its established society and familiar customs. But standing beside Trace Sullivan as the setting sun painted the western sky in brilliant hues of orange and gold, Olivia knew with absolute certainty that she had found something far more valuable than what she'd left behind, a place where she was valued for herself, not her appearance or connections, and a love built on the foundation of true acceptance. The following spring brought changes to Cedar Springs that few could have predicted. When Olivia Fairchild first arrived with holes in her shoes and determination in her heart, the school flourished under her guidance, with enrollment growing to include children from outlying ranches who boarded in town during the week. Mayor Wilkins, impressed by her success, secured funding for additional books and teaching materials, turning the once sparse schoolhouse into a center of learning that rivaled those in larger settlements. Mrs. Henderson, in a turn that surprised everyone, became one of Olivia's strongest supporters after her grandson won a territory-wide essay contest under Olivia's tutelage. The social barriers that had initially seemed insurmountable dissolved as Olivia proved herself not just competent, but exceptional at bringing education to the frontier. For Trace and Olivia, the months following their declaration brought a deepening of their connection that exceeded both their expectations. Their courtship, though official, merely formalized what had already grown between them, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine love. They weathered their first challenges together, a harsh winter storm that threatened Trace's herd, community resistance to some of Olivia's more progressive teaching methods, the inevitable adjustments of two independent people learning to build a life together. On a perfect day in late May, with the prairie bursting with wildflowers and the mountains standing clear against the blue sky, they were married in Cedar Springs' small church. The entire town turned out for the celebration, from Mrs. Henderson in her finest silk to the youngest of Olivia's students clutching handmade gifts for their beloved teacher. Sarah, serving as Olivia's attendant, wiped away tears as the couple exchanged vows they had written themselves. Trace's promise to continue seeing Olivia for who she truly was, beyond any external circumstance, echoed his first words to her nearly a year earlier. Olivia's pledge to build their life together with the same care and dedication she brought to her teaching drew appreciative murmurs from the assembled townspeople. Perhaps most touching was the moment when Reverend Parker asked who gave this woman in marriage. Instead of the traditional response from a male relative, 20 small voices answered in unison, "We do." Olivia's students, arranged in the front pews, had insisted on this role, declaring with the logic of children that since they were her Wyoming family, the responsibility should be theirs. The reception that followed at Sullivan Ranch showcased the community Olivia had become part of, ranchers and townspeople, merchants and miners, all celebrating together as the new couple began their life as husband and wife. Dancing continued well into the night, with Trace and Olivia opening the floor before being joined by what seemed like every resident of Cedar Springs and the surrounding countryside. "Happy?" Trace asked as they finally took a moment alone on the porch, the sounds of fiddle music and laughter drifting from the barn where the dancing continued. Olivia leaned against him, her wedding dress sewn by Sarah and several other women in town catching the moonlight. "More than I knew was possible," she admitted. Though I keep expecting to wake up and find myself back in Boston, wondering if Wyoming territory even exists." Trace chuckled, his arm tightening around her waist. "I assure you, Mrs. Sullivan, this is very real." The new name, spoken with such pride and tenderness, sent a shiver of joy through Olivia. "Mrs. Sullivan," she repeated, testing the sound of it. "I like that more than I expected to." "Good," he murmured, brushing a kiss against her temple. "Because I plan on calling you that for the rest of our lives." Later that night, after the last guests had departed, and they were finally alone in the ranch house that was now their shared home, Trace led Olivia to the bedroom, where a single pair of women's shoes sat beside the door, not the worn pair she'd arrived in, but new boots, sturdy and practical for ranch life. "A wedding gift," he explained, watching her reaction carefully. Though perhaps a bit presumptuous, Olivia knelt to examine them, running her fingers over the fine leather. "They're beautiful," she said, looking up at him with understanding in her eyes. "But you know I don't need them to feel welcome here." "I know," he agreed, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "Just as I know that what makes you extraordinary has nothing to do with what you wear or where you came from. But winter's harsh on the ranch, and I want you to be comfortable in your new home." "Our home," she corrected gently, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "And I already am." The years that followed brought both joys and challenges to the Sullivans, as they do to any couple building a life together. Olivia continued teaching, dividing her time between the Cedar Springs school and the growing educational needs of neighboring communities. Trace expanded his horse breeding operation, gaining recognition throughout the territory for the quality of his stock. Their first child, a daughter named Eleanor after Olivia's mother, arrived a year after their wedding, followed 2 years later by a son they called James, honoring Trace's father. The children grew up with the best of both worlds, their mother's love of learning and their father's connection to the land, creating a family that embodied the frontier's blend of resilience and refinement. Cedar Springs itself prospered and expanded, eventually incorporating as a proper town, with Trace serving several terms on the town council and Olivia helping to establish the territory's first lending library. When Wyoming achieved statehood in 1890, the Sullivans celebrated alongside neighbors who had become family over the years. Through it all, they never forgot how their story began, with a proud woman in worn-out shoes and a man who saw beyond appearances to the person within. The lessons of that beginning guided their marriage, their parenting, and their contributions to the community they helped build. On their 20th anniversary, as they sat on the porch of the ranch house watching their children and a new generation of young people enjoy a celebration that had become an annual tradition, Trace presented Olivia with a small wooden box. "What's this?" she asked, surprised by the unexpected gift. "Open it," he encouraged, watching her with the same warmth that had drawn her to him all those years ago. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, lay a pair of tiny shoes, worn, patched, and unmistakably familiar. "My old shoes," Olivia breathed, lifting one carefully. "Where did you find them? I thought I'd thrown them away after Sarah convinced you they were beyond saving." Trace finished for her. "You did, but I rescued them from the trash." At her questioning look, he explained, "They're part of our story. Seemed wrong to let them go." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes as she understood the sentiment behind the gesture. These humble shoes, once a source of shame, had become a symbol of their beginning and of the truth they'd built their life upon. "Thank you," she whispered, leaning against his shoulder as they had countless times over the years. "For saving them. For saving me, in more ways than one." Trace pressed a kiss to her hair, now threaded with silver that matched his own. "We saved each other," he corrected gently, "and built something neither of us could have created alone." As the sun set over the Wyoming landscape they both loved, painting the sky in colors no eastern city could match, Olivia reflected on the strange and wonderful path that had brought her here. From a desperate arrival in a dusty frontier town to becoming half of one of its most respected families, her journey had been anything but predictable. Yet sitting beside the man who had welcomed her just as she was, surrounded by the family and community they'd built together, Olivia Fairchild Sullivan knew with absolute certainty that she had walked exactly where she was meant to go, holes in her shoes and all.